What you can see there is that roughly 2/3 of productivity growth, by our estimates, came from public research, development and extension. They're the blue and green sectors there. The green sector there shows 1/3 of the productivity growth we enjoyed over that 55-year period came from spill-ins from innovations and technology from overseas. That's the benefit of the research that we pick up when we adopt that technology. Another roughly 1/3 comes from the public investment in research, development and extension in this country. And finally, another 1/3 comes from other factors such as the things I've mentioned earlier on, the macroeconomic conditions, the external factors, but also importantly from the investments that the farm sector makes itself in our research, development and extension. It's also very interesting to note the significant role that extension plays in the Australian experience there. 14%, or about, roughly about half of the gain that we've got from research, development and extension has actually come from the extension part, which we think is quite significant. A little bit of a detour, and I'm sorry about this, into a bit of theory, or abstraction at least anyway, really just wanting to explore this question of incentives for productivity growth. The production frontier there is simply trying to show that you can combine inputs to produce a certain amount of outputs, but after a while, diminishing returns set in. It's hard to continue to produce inputs with known technology. The best farms in the country are those little blue dots sitting on that production frontier. They're the leaders. They can't improve their production in any way. They're right at the edge of the frontier. What a new innovation does is enable that production frontier to move out so the same farm can produce more from the same amount of inputs or use less inputs to produce the same amount. What we've found in our research though is that not every farm is sitting on that first production frontier. And what we've actually found is that it's quite easy, well, maybe not easy, but it is possible for farms to catch up, to improve their productivity by simply catching up with the best farms. What I guess the key message from our research though is that over the last 30 years, the difference between the best farms and the average farms has been widening. The gap has been widening. The average farm has been falling behind the best farms at a rate of about 0.3% a year for each of the last 30 years. Clearly something's happening. Clearly there's some incentives that aren't being taken up, or there's some disincentives for movement. Some of those disincentives might be things like farm size, slower rates of structural adjustment in the sector, ageing farm managers. There's been a whole lot of things that have been postulated as reasons for that. Another factor that might be playing a role though is uncertainty, and the uncertainty that is created by the multiple reform agendas that are currently facing the farm community. Don't get me wrong, the reforms I've got there are absolutely essential. They are in place to try and improve productivity in each of those sectors. However, there's a lot of them going on at the moment. There's a lot of them being developed, and there's a lot of debate about those. During this sort of time, we can expect that it is hard for farmers to invest when they're not sure about what the price of water will be, they're not sure about water allocation, they're not sure of the direction that the Australian government is heading in relation to drought reform at present. We're not really sure what's going to happen in the Doha round. We don't know what that's going to do, and we're not really sure what the price of carbon will be in the longer run. So just as floods and cyclones have meant that farmers have had to divert their long-run investments into getting back on their feet, uncertainty can do the same thing in terms of long-run investment. We think it's very important for farm industry leaders and governments to lead the sector through these reforms. They are essential, they have to be done. They hold the prospect of some really significant gains in our productivity growth. And it's really important for us to think clearly about where these reforms are going and how important they might be to the long run. So that's it. I might just reiterate my conclusions. The floods and cyclones have had a devastating effect and a profound effect on individuals, on farm businesses and on communities. It's knocked the gloss off what would have been a cracker of a year. But despite this, we're still forecasting higher farm production and exports, and in the near future, we can see considerable scope for optimism. Commodity prices will remain relatively high in the short term, and with the replenishment of our irrigation storages and improvements in our soil moisture profiles, we think there's some room for some optimism. The message I'm trying to deliver is that productivity growth is the only insurance policy that government and industry should be pursuing at this time as we contemplate the long-run consequences and policy responses we might make to increasingly severe weather events. Also wanted to make you aware of the new ABARES research that underlines the importance of research development and extension, and to contemplate that as governments move forward to consider the response to the Productivity Commission, inquiry into the research and development corporations, and how we might go forward with our research policy over the next 20 years. Finally, the final observation is that our necessary but perhaps uncertainty creating an overlapping policy reform agenda may be undermining some of our short-term productivity performance. I'd like to thank you for listening. I really hope that you enjoy the conference. I encourage you all to attend the subsequent sessions, which will go into all of what I've said in much more detail. Thank you for your patience.